tricky part comes into play when they put family bloodline before the needs of the role, in that they will force a family member into a position that they don't have the skill sets for, they don't have the passion for. When that happens, it's not only obviously an unhappy and unfulfilling situation for the family member, it's a nightmare for the team that they're leading. And it's demoralizing for the team that they're leading, because the team knows who's qualified for that position, who's not. And that is typically my number one problem that I see founder-led family-owned businesses lean to.
What's one story, if there is in fact one, that best captures why leaders call you when they're stuck?
One story that captures it. I think I'll share, I was working with a family-owned business a couple years ago that owned a franchise operation. And the father had reached out to me because he had his two sons working in the business. And it was one of those typical family-run business scenarios where everybody's working really hard and being very busy, eking by, making money, but knowing they're working way too hard for the amount of money that they're generating and the margins they're realizing. And so the dad asked me to come in and to see if I could help them identify what they might want to focus on doing. And the initial obvious thing was to start identifying who's doing what and how do they do the different things. So we could create systems and processes and procedures that could be, number one, streamlined, but also could be shared in case anyone was out of the office, out of work that day, somebody else could pick it up. So a pretty basic starting point. And we've been working together for, I would say, probably a year or so, and getting to a point where we were starting to identify what roles the different sons were involved with, and got into a situation where part of my work also with my clients is not only am I in an advisory or coaching capacity with many of them, but we're also helping them create their company strategic plan. So we also work on vision, mission, and values for the company. You're kind of setting the big goal, and then we create annual goals, annual plans to move towards their vision. A key component of that discussion also is company values, which I call it the house rules. So these are the behaviors that outline the non-negotiable behaviors of everyone who's taking a paycheck from the company. Includes the ownership team and to the newest hire. So I say that as background because this particular morning I got a phone call from the father of the company, and it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, which is way earlier than most of my clients would ever start calling. And he said there was an emergency situation that came up and needed me to come talk with him and meet with him and his wife. And I didn't have any idea, but it was a fairly local company, so I went there and walked in and had come to find out that one of the sons had done something highly inappropriate, highly unacceptable. And the parents were obviously devastated, hurt, scared, and didn't know what to do. And so I called one of my HR consultants, and I had her talking them through some of the legalities and technical things that needed to be addressed. But the dad looked at me and he said, "Liz," he said, I don't know what to do with my son. What do I do?" And I said, "Well, let me ask you this. Just last month, you rolled out the company values to all your employees, and you said you're going to hold them accountable to these values. Given what your son did he violate any of these values?" And he's like, "Oh my God, yeah." And I said, "So what do you need to do?" And he looked at me and he said, "You just made this easier and way harder than I thought it was going to be." And I just share that as an example because I try to be non-judgmental and I try to be very supportive, but my role is to help them as objectively as possible identify what the next step forward is for them in moving forward. And because of that, I worked with that particular, I don't know because of that, but I worked with that particular company for 7 years. And then when the parents retired, I worked with the sons for several years. And I think it's just a matter of, as you do, you build a relationship with them where I'm not their best buddy, I'm not their friend, but they know that if they tell me something, it's confidential and that I have their backs to the best of my ability, and my client is typically their company, and I am trying to help them as individuals be the best they can be to help their companies move forward.
I sometimes playfully, and it seems to be getting more and more less playfully these days, consider that our prefrontal cortex doesn't reside entirely inside our skull because oftentimes we need each other to hold ourselves accountable. Like, you've heard the expression, like, give an inch, they take a mile. I don't think that's necessarily a character defect. I think we all will do that. It's like rolling downhill. We need to be told, like, make that hard decision now and things will fall in place. I think most of us want to be a good person. But if you allow me to be a good person for $1 versus $100, I will be, like, more often than not. So being held to that higher standard, let's say, or just logic oftentimes, it'd be nice if we just read each other's minds and you never had to tell me anything. But I think that coaching is really important in that capacity, or advising in this case, because like you said, you're not looking for a raise. You're not competing with someone else on the org chart. You're there to help the company. And sometimes what you have to say is inconvenient, but very necessary. Um, and it sounds like you definitely made the right call, given that you stayed on both with that client, but also the sons. Um, you've been recognized as a top 30 global guru on leadership and a top 100 HR influencer. Do these accolades reflect how you see yourself, or do you see your role differently?
That's a really good question. I will tell you, um, being named a top 30 global guru on leadership was a complete shock and a complete surprise. But because it was in a list with Simon Sinek and John Maxwell and others, and that's a league unto itself. Um, so is it something that I see myself as? No. Is it something I think I would aspire to in a weird way? Yeah. To try to live up to that little moniker and that recognition. Um, but in full candor, what those recognitions did for me was, um, the work that I've done and what I share on social media or what I've written over the past 30 years in books or articles, something has resonated with a larger audience in my immediate client base. And for that, I'm very grateful. And for that, it gives me the incentive to continue doing what I'm doing.
I have a quick follow up there because I see a connection between what you said earlier, how many business owners, I don't think you use the words undersell their services, but sometimes they feel that they could be charging more, the margins are a bit tight. And sometimes there's various reasons why. But one thing that you brought up here, that you're on a list with Simon Sinek and some others, and you feel that you don't belong there. It's like you have evidence that you do belong there, and I see this correlation, or this parallel with business owners or entrepreneurs feeling that they can't charge more, or that they're not good enough or something like that. How do you, or do you have any kind of heuristics or temperature checks for um, believing in yourself versus delusion, or are they the same thing?
Hmm. I think what I do to address that scenario is I'm a part of a mastermind group. And I also have a mentor on the consulting side of my business. So my mastermind group is like on the speaking side of my business, and I have a mentor on the consulting side of my business. And those two outlets for me are gauges to assess um, where I am in the development of my various expertise or my craft. Um, and also in some way to gauge where I am in the marketplace and if I'm overselling or underselling, meaning fees and fee structure and things like that. So that's how I kind of keep a pulse on those types of things. Um, but I don't ever think um, that I've shied away from fee. In fact, I've quite often I've told a lot of my clients I will never be the cheapest, um, but I will be one of those that you won't have continual change order fees if you work with me as well. Like, oops, didn't plan for that. I typically have a pretty solid scope of work outlined.
Nice. So we've talked about potentially imposter syndrome as something that you might be dealing with your clients. When it comes to leaders, and I'm thinking maybe leaders that have just come in to C-suite positions, or maybe just taken over a business, or maybe it's a solopreneur there. What are some of the common themes that you see that those leaders struggle with, and how do you support them in those struggles?
Um, the most common aspect of my advisory or coaching work with individuals who are new to the C-suite or are new to their position in the C-suite, um, or are new in their leadership role. I'm going to circle back to what I mentioned earlier, is getting clear on what that new role looks like. And again, that's a pretty basic statement, but as you and any of your listeners may know, if they've worked within an executive team or at that level, there is a different level of thought process. There is a different level of leadership skill. There's a different level of enterprise-wide perspective that needs to occur, that individuals who are new in that level or new into those roles don't often appreciate and haven't yet developed. They can still come in and believe that their charge is to carry the flag for their department. And that's not what it's about. Um, one of the executive coaching clients I worked with last spring was a new hire, executive level hire into a large data warehouse, one of these data warehouse centers that are constructed all over, and came in a very healthy salary. But as you may well know, part of the compensation package often for individuals that come in at these higher levels, they've got to prove themselves within the first 90 days. And there are some significant deliverables. And she had significant deliverables that she was pretty confident technically that she'd be able to come through on. But one of the things that I worked with her on also was identifying, in addition to her functional role on the executive team and the technical skills that she was going to bring to that functional role, what else did the executive team need that they didn't know they needed that she could bring? And one of the things that we quickly identified was, because that business and that industry is growing so rapidly, everybody's running around like everything is on fire. And so if she could come in and be the the calm within the storm that would not slow people down, but could identify objectively and calmly and professionally what were the priority items to focus on as an executive team collectively to move them forward to collectively, and help the CEO articulate that, she would find a greater spot of influence on the executive team. And it worked out. That it was a skill she had. It was quickly identified by the CEO that she was a strong ally and a strong resource. Um, And so luckily for her, and she deserved it. She got her bonus, she got her comp. But it's a long answer, Becky, to your question of identifying not only how to think and lead differently at that executive level, but I'm often asking and encouraging my clients is let's identify what else you bring to that team they don't even know they need yet.
Mhm. So I want to unpack that a little bit into potentially, you said thinking differently. Also, you mentioned the skill set as well. And then
hmm
also potentially strategy, which could be separate things. How deep do you go into each of those? Are they equal in terms of what your client needs? You'll go into each of those. Do you have one that you think, for example, mindset might be more important than others? How do you balance those maybe three core areas of leadership: skill, mindset, and strategy?
It depends upon where the client is.
Mhm.
If they are I can't help them technically because I don't know their industry. So hopefully, they're technically strong. In this case, this particular woman was. So technically, that isn't the issue. But what may be part of the technical challenge for them is how do they work with the systems in place that they are now supposed to manage that deal with the technical aspects of their job. So we might get into some conversations about refining, revamping, replacing the systems and process of procedures that they're responsible for. In this case, she was responsible for. We may go down that road. The confidence part of it is that typically is driven by how well they understand what their role is going to be. Here's what they were hired to do. This is what they signed the contract to do. But what does that look like in play now that you're actually sitting in the executive suite with these other team members, and some of them have got some wacky personalities. So how do you now bring your best self to that team to become a strong player, a contributing player, and a great collaborator? And then the third part of it that you alluded to is the strategy part of it is hopefully the company has a strategic plan, but if not, how do you pull out of the other members of your team where are we headed as a company and what are the milestone marks that we're working towards, and then given my functional responsibility, what is my team and my department responsible for, and then how do we marry that and leverage that with everything else that everybody else on this team is doing. So again, it's marrying strategy and marrying function with understanding what's good for the collective whole as an executive team to move this organization forward.
Mhm. Makes sense, kind of balancing it out, like you said, depending on what the client needs. When it comes to leadership skill, I've always found it mind blowing that people are often promoted into leadership positions, often their first leadership or managerial role, and just sort of left to crack on. There's the expectation: if you're a good salesperson, you'll be a good sales leader. If you're a good engineer, you'll be a good leader of engineers, with no bridge in the gap of leadership skills. With that in mind, what do you think are the most common leadership skills that are lacking and that maybe leaders don't realize until they get there that they are lacking?
Um, uh, I deal with this particular scenario with just about every one of my clients,
Right.
regardless of position, um, because it happens way too often, as you just alluded to, and for whatever reason, we just think it's an easy fix to promote David because thank goodness he's a great IT guy, so he's got to be a great IT manager. Well, technical skills and management skills, two different skill sets.
Mhm.
Um, I think the most underrated but most valuable leadership or management skill that an individual who has been promoted from within needs to fully understand and embrace is that their job has now gone from being the best producer to being the best leverager of the talents that they are now responsible for. So that means I am no longer expecting David to be the highest producer when I promote him. I'm expecting him to now train up his team so they can produce as high as they did when he was a peer, to not even to, if nothing else, higher now that he is their manager, because he not only understands the job, but now he's going to get an even more intimate understanding of every one of his team members' skills, where their challenges are, where their roadblocks are, and where there are hiccups in the system or the facilities or the tools or whatever that they're using that are causing them to work harder than they need to. And his job is to clear those roadblocks. It's not to work 16 hours a day and be the super producer as well as try to be a manager. If he does that, he's going to hold his team back and he's going to burn himself out.
Mhm.
In family owned or founder led companies, what dynamics make succession especially tricky?
Um, the tricky part comes into play when they put family bloodline before the needs of the role, in that they will force a family member into a position that they don't have the skill sets for, they don't have the passion for, um, and when that happens, it's not only obviously an unhappy and unfulfilling situation for the family member, it's a nightmare for the team that they're leading. And it's demoralizing for the team that they're leading because the team knows who's qualified for that position, who's not. Um, and that is typically my number one problem that I see founder-led family-owned businesses lean to, which is why I'm going to circle back to something I alluded to earlier. One of my initial conversations with a lot of my family-owned businesses is, as I say, um, even though, Becky, you're the president of the company and you own it and that type of thing, my client is actually the company. And so as president, I will share insights with you to try to help you be the best president this company has now and this company's going to have for the next 15 or 20 years. But it's my role to help you be the best president you can be. And if that means I see you doing things that aren't right for the company, given the position you have, um, those are some things we'll talk about when we have our conversations. And it's no different than if you try to place your cousin as, the chief of sales, and he stinks at sales. Why are you doing that? That is the lifeblood of your company. And just because, cousin Rich needs a job doesn't mean cousin Rich should get that position. Let's find a better role for him to fulfill within the company and look at what the position requires, and then let's make a match for family if you want to do family first. But if there isn't a family first option, then let's look for somebody that's not a bloodline that can fill that function better, because what you really have in play here is you really want to carry a family business forward. So let's put people in the family business that can help move it forward, even if it's not a family member. And that sounds odd, but that's saying I'm not excluding family members. I just want to make sure that we've got people in positions that can help move this family business forward the best.
That's really interesting to hear. There's so many kind of comparisons I want to make. But going back to coaching and the kind of aha moment for me was realizing that a lot of my life was choice because it seemed kind of fixed. And you mentioned like family business, like family, like how you go about that. It could be family values. It could be taking care of your family by taking care of the business. If you limit it to these are all the only ingredients I have, my two brothers and my sister, um, you might be successful with the right consultants and stuff, but what would it look like if you just broaden that up, open the aperture a little bit? Um, so I'd like to ask you, when you first walk into a company, Liz, and the company knows they need to change, what's the very first lever that you pull?
Well, it depends on why they've asked to have me come and talk with them or work with them. And typically the main three reasons that I start an engagement is, number one, they're looking to either create or update a strategic plan. And that's one of the reasons that I get called in to work with clients. As part of those conversations, then when we start talking about where do they want to take the company over the next 3, 5, 10 or more years, as you can well imagine, we're talking about, given how this company is going to morph and change and potentially grow, what positions, what talent, what type of people do you need to either skill up, recruit from the outside, or realign internally to allow them to help you do what this company needs to do to move forward. So get into succession and workforce planning conversations. And then the third thing that I do is the leadership coaching, the advisory, the limited training. I used to do a lot of training. I don't do that much anymore. And so depending upon why they're calling me in, it kind of determines where we go. And historically, when I started my company, it was a training company. I would get called in to quote unquote fix the managers because the managers didn't know how to manage. So it was easy to say, well, where do we have these skill deficiencies? And to go back to your question earlier, Becky, it was quite often learning how to delegate and offload responsibilities that you have carried forward into your new role that you should have offloaded with team members. And so identifying some of those situations. But what I typically do, David, to your question is I typically always go to the strategic plan and I ask them, if they have one or if we're going to create one, we create one. Because from what I found with my experience, that provides the objective focal point of why they're all there to do what they're there to do. That strategic plan outlines their vision, mission, values, which is the company culture and the company focus. And then their strategic goals outline their marching steps over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 or more year, what they need to deliver, what they need to produce. And so my role then with them is, whether I'm working with the board, the leadership team, or managers, is, given your role and given where this company is headed, what do you need to be doing to help move it forward? So from the board or the executive team, what strategic issues should you be questioning going forward so that you can continue to clear the roadblocks for the team as they implement and move the plan forward? As management team, as managers, what skills do you need to be developing yourselves and within your team to enable them to do the jobs they're responsible for doing now, not only doing them better now, but to start training them up so that as their new responsibilities start to hit over the life of this plan, they're well positioned to take on these new responsibilities and these new challenges, and they're not constantly running behind the 8 ball. And so it really depends upon the situation, but I'm usually helping them identify, go back to your plan. What are you supposed to be doing given the strategic plan? How does your particular function fit into this plan? What's expected of you? And then what are you doing to help drive that forward?
Nice. I wanted to take a pivot, Liz, because you've written, "Don't let them treat you like a girl." So I wanted to unpack that a little bit and ask you what inspired the book, and have you seen anything change in terms of the culture of women in leadership since?
Um, so great question. So first off, the title from the book, Don't Let Them Treat You Like a Girl, was actually advice my dad gave to me when I was 24. And I was going out to negotiate my first new car purchase on my own. Because
Yeah.
before that, my dad had gone with me when I had purchased a vehicle before that. And, he had handled all the negotiations, he had handled everything. But this particular time, I had moved away from home and I was living in Washington, D.C., and I called my dad and I told him, the car that I was interested, the price of it, what I wanted to pay. I gave him all the details. And he sat and listened. And then I was waiting for some profound insights and sales negotiation tips coming back for him. And all he simply said was, Liz, you know what you want. You know what you can afford. So when you go back to the dealership to make the deal, don't let them treat you like a girl. And I went, huh. And knowing my dad, he wasn't making any kind of sexist comment. What he was making the point was, Liz, it's your job to be an informed purchaser. When you go back to that dealership, don't go in there and think they're going to take care of you and give you a great deal because they like you. Their job is to make a profit for the dealership. Your job as a consumer is to be an informed consumer and go in there and advocate for yourself and negotiate for yourself. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me. And so when I wrote the book years later, that was the advice. One of the pieces of advice I was sharing in that book was the need for women in particular, that's who the book was targeting, but for men also, is in the workplace, realize that you are the employee, but that doesn't mean your employer is going to take care of you. They will bring a lot to the table, but you also are responsible for doing the job you're being paid to do. You're responsible for leveraging the opportunities that are made available to you, or seek out opportunities to leverage your skill sets, leverage your exposure opportunities. So if you choose to want to advance within that company or add to your resume, that should be on you to build those additional, accolades on your resume, and those career builders. Don't wait for somebody else. Um, and the reason that popped in my mind was I was doing exactly that when I was in my first career. I had a really good position. I was a contractor with the State Department, and I was friends with my boss. He had opened a number of doors for me. And I remember sitting in his office one day, and I don't remember what this scenario was exactly, but I remember I was sharing my frustration for him because my career wasn't advancing as quickly as possible. And as I say, he was a friend of mine, and he just turned to me and he said, "Liz, it's not my job to advance your career. That's yours." And for my boss quote friend to come back to me so quickly and say, "That's not my responsibility," that was a wake-up call for me, and that's also what kind of helped trigger the ultimate writing of the book several years after that. Is, I just realized there's a lot of other people that are in that scenario saying, "Well, I'm not given the opportunity to work on that project," or "I wasn't given the opportunity to do this." Well, it's then you have to go make those opportunities happen. Have you told them you're interested? Well, no. Well, it's kind of like my oldest daughter when she was in high school and she wanted to be a model. And I said, "Well, that's great. Then what can you find out about being a model?" "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, no one's going to come knocking on our door here saying, 'Hey, is there a teenage wannabe model living here?' I mean, that's not going to happen. You've got to create your opportunities."
Mhm.
I guess as we start to wrap up, Liz, if you had one piece of advice for leaders navigating the uncertainty of 2025 with AI, hybrid work, generational shifts, this and that, what would it be?
Well, I'll share with you my projections for leaders' focus over this next at least 9 months coming up, and who knows what the focus is going to be after that. But I gave a presentation last week to a group of human resources professionals, and I shared with them my projections based upon my client base, which are government, private sector, trade associations, and healthcare systems. And their top 5 projections are this. Number 1, I see a continuing and growing need for knowledgeable, confident leaders and staff. And what I mean by that is COVID wiped out a large segment of the leadership pool with individuals who were older and more tenured in their employment years, that I saw go, "Wait a minute, I'm not dealing with this. I'll retire early." And they left. Because they retired earlier than planned, they didn't take the time to offload well what they knew to other people that were left behind. And we know COVID was just a chaotic time anyway. So you had a lot of people scrambling, trying to pick up the pieces. What's also been happening now is with the shifts and the changes in the economy and all these types of things, there's also another big swath of leaders that have left, whether it's federal government or subcontractors or whatever, and again, a lot of talent has been left behind that hasn't had the time to get up to speed and learn how to do this. And in addition to that, even if people have been around for decades and are seasoned in being really strong leaders, things are changing so quickly, and things are coming at them so quickly. It's really hard to identify and know what to focus on and what to move forward with confidently. So that's number one, big projection. So the need for knowledgeable, competent leaders is growing more than ever. So that's why I really focus on leadership development. Coaching is huge, helping those leaders and future leaders gain the skills they need to gain. The second projection, David, you alluded to this, is you've really got to get comfortable with AI, learning how to have it complement the work that you do, if not replace some of the things that are right now just incredibly labor intensive and unnecessary. But then also really get good at understanding data and what are the data and the metrics and the analysis that you need to do to better understand your business. And I think those are two technical skill sets that are not yet as strong as they need to be, generally across the board. Um, a third thing that I'm projecting with my clients again is a growing comfort level with agility and accountability. And agility, it seems pretty obvious. Yes, things are changing all the time, but I really see the pendulum swinging back on employees being held to higher standards than they've been exposed to for the last 5 years, and that being required. I mean, return to work is a big one. That's still a heartache for a lot of people. But even whether you're still remote, hybrid, even in person, I'm seeing a growing expectation for employee performance to be high, for employees to be doing the full scope of their position responsibilities, and I just see that need for individual accountability to be rising. Um, David, you alluded to this issue also. There's just more generational diversity in the workforce. You've got a lot of individuals, those that are still hanging on, that have been around for decades, that are working longer, because either they just simply want to or they have to for financial or health insurance reasons. So you've got individuals who are honestly in their 70s now working with individuals who were 21 and 22. I mean, that's a 50-year time span. That's really never happened before. Um, and all of that happening at the same time with the continued push for customization, whether it's service customization or product customization. So I just think there's a lot of challenges facing individuals and facing leadership teams coming forward at a pace they've never had before.
It seems that way. For listeners who want to lead more strategically starting today, what's one practice they can implement immediately?
Ask themselves what they need to stop doing. And they probably know. And it kind of goes back to what the three of us were talking about when we first connected here, is many of us know what we should be doing. We just subconsciously choose to continue to do what's comfortable for us. So if an individual wants to lead more strategically, it typically means, from my experience, that they are getting fulfillment out of being busy instead of focusing their time and attention on the few things that are actually going to move the company forward strategically, because those things are harder and they take longer. So the needle doesn't move as fast. You can't mark something off the checklist as quickly. So I would circle back and say, ask themselves what they need to stop doing and what they need to focus their attention on, that's going to help them grow their business, increase their margin, or whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish.
I think
Well,
that's
thank
great
you for
advice.
talking with us. Sorry, Becky, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that's great advice for everybody, regardless, is to reflect on what's one thing I should stop doing. I think we could all benefit from doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, for talking to us today. A lot of great insights. Where can people get in touch with you, follow along with what you're doing? Do you have any news you'd like to share?
Sure. People can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active, and my handle on LinkedIn is Liz Weber CMC. Weber has one B. They can also connect with me. And my website is wbsllc.com. That stands for Weber Business Services LLC.com. So either one of those locations, they can find me.
Great. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.